Hey there, my name's Curtis Lucas and you're watching Empire Building. So yes, I'm back. 2 weeks I've been gone and I've had everything from rumors of my demise to I just left. Truth is, I just had a trip to make for business purposes. Picked up a brand new truck because I had one that finally decided to die. I've been milking that for as long as I could. So it was time to lay it to rest and finally reward myself with a brand new truck for the first time in my life. I wouldn't really consider myself to be like the Graham Steffens of the world. I'm not a penny pincher. I'm not the most frugal person out there. But I do tend to not spend money when it's not needed. But I was on this business trip with the new truck and I was just trying to enjoy myself for a little while. And I do find that stepping back a little bit and doing something else is going to give you at least a little bit more of perspective. And we all know how much I appreciate perspective. But no, I am not going anywhere. I am back in town and I'm ready to get back into the old routine, producing videos on a regular basis, starting with this one. Just having a recap of the way things have gone over the last couple of weeks since I left. The last video I uploaded was actually April 18th, if anybody remembers. I know it feels like forever ago, but really 2 weeks, that was it. April 18th, the price of Bitcoin was approximately $57,300. And by comparison, Mara's price on the 18th was about where we are right now, as it turns out. So in that regard, we can certainly see that Bitcoin's up a little bit compared to Mara. And generally speaking, some of the miners have had it worse, some have had it better. It's certainly been a bit of a roller coaster the last couple of weeks, so I can certainly appreciate the anxiety that a lot of people have been going through. But the other thing to keep in mind here is if you're thinking about this as a longer term investment, I know it sucks if maybe you just got in at some price higher than we're at right now, but the reality is, at least on a year-to-date basis, things are really not that bad. On January 1st, where were we? We were about $10 or so, if I remember correctly. In the $9 to $12 range. So that's pretty good performance on a year-to-date basis. And while it's pretty painfully obvious that our performance, generally speaking, we've now managed to expand that channel and we're sitting at the bottom of it. So again, as signals go, this is as good a time as it gets for people to be accumulating. There's no guarantee the price is just going to skyrocket up, but there's also no telling when that might happen next. So for those of you who are cost averaging, you're doing very well right now. I'd say for anyone who's actually been holding through this, you will be rewarded. There is so much more to come here. And some of you may not be aware that the difficulty on the Bitcoin blockchain has actually dropped significantly, approximately 12% last time I checked. This means that Bitcoin miners are going to be 12% more profitable, as in acquiring 12% more Bitcoin than they previously were during the last difficulty adjustment. And of course, this is a result of the miner shutdown in China, where the hash rate that we saw dropped in half. Events like that are rare, but they do have an impact on the overall speed of the network, like we discussed in the very last video. So now, 2 weeks later, that adjustment has taken effect, and the drop in hash rate has resulted in a lower difficulty rating. So as you can see, there hasn't been very many times in Bitcoin's history that has seen a drop like we just witnessed. The hash rate was one thing, but this is a pretty significant drop in difficulty. Now, it will recover, and probably fairly quickly, but it's going to take at least 2 weeks just for the next difficulty adjustment to take effect. Now, as always, it can be frustrating that events such as these, which, as I pointed out last time, have absolutely no impact in the health of the network, the security of the network, or anything else. The only effect it had was that the rate that blocks were produced slowed for a period of time. And miners really benefit on both sides of this, because while the rate of blocks reduce, the amount of the transaction fees actually increase. And this again is painfully obvious when we look at this chart. The transaction fees on the Bitcoin network went through the roof during this last period as a result. So miners get paid even more. Even though the rate of block production had dropped, the amount of transactions per block has gone up substantially. So miners are going to benefit no matter what happens here. I'm looking forward to seeing what impact this is going to have on the amount of Bitcoin acquired during this period. Now that mining fees have dropped, like I said, they're going to continue to benefit from the drop in difficulty rate. So we're going to get a whole month at least of benefit of this, maybe even more. And to make matters even better, what we're also witnessing now is China is going to have a hard time expanding their influence from where it currently stands on the network, because they're basically at capacity. Their grid can't handle that much more Bitcoin. Their government is cracking down on this. There's just not enough power production in China for them to go a whole lot further than they already have. We've got a whole wealth of capacity in other parts of the world that are just waiting to be built out. This is what we're witnessing happen. So over time, this narrative about China being the main source of hash power on the network is going to fade away, because they just can't keep up. They'd have to be building out more and more power production facilities just to expand the amount of network hash power that they can actually install there. So this is painfully obvious to any of us who are paying attention, but it's still a narrative that's being pushed. And you'll start to see that shifting in the mainstream over the next 2 to 3 years. They don't have the ability to look ahead. They don't have the ability to rationalize exactly how this works, the physics of it. And the same goes for the argument about profitability of these miners. This isn't going away anytime soon. And it's compounded to make it even more difficult for new entrants into this sector. Yes, obviously, they all use the same equipment. There's not really a barrier to entry in the sense that one has an advantage over the other because they have better equipment. The only way they have that advantage is if they acquired better equipment faster than their competitors. And better equipment is going to be harder and harder to come by, not just because of supply constraints, but also because of the diminishing impact of Moore's Law. For those of you wondering, Moore's Law is essentially, it refers to the Moore's perception that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles every 2 years, though the cost of computers is halved. Basically, this has been a pattern that's been observed in computers ever since they were developed. Microchips have been getting smaller all the time and also cheaper all the time. But the effect of this is diminishing now. We're reaching the limit of what transistors can do in silicon chips. They can't make them much smaller. I'm going to do a further video diving into this topic in further detail because it is fascinating. And the impact on the Bitcoin network is something that hasn't been fully realized, and definitely not in the mainstream. They barely understand mining as it is. But the advantage of the early movers is far greater than people realize. And for anyone that just expects that Bitcoin's price is just going to fall 80% at any moment, sooner or later is going to come to realize things are different now. The entire ecosystem of Bitcoin is not the same, and it's never going to be the same again. I have a lot of topics I really want to get through, and I'm going to be splitting them up into different videos over the next few weeks. I've got a lot of great ideas planned, and while I haven't been making videos here, I've been somewhat active over on Discord, and I've been enjoying the conversations. I've been trying to keep up to date with what's going on there. It's growing fast. And it really helps me understand the level of sophistication in most of the investors that are in this space. Many of you have done your homework. You understand all of these things. So it's made me realize that it's time I go into further detail. We got to really get into the weeds here, because mining is not as straightforward as people think it is, at least not the value perspective. This isn't just about PE ratios and profit per quarter. We really need to start thinking longer term, not just what we think Bitcoin's price of Bitcoin is going to get to this year, which, for the record, I believe is substantially north of $100,000. But the reality is, whatever Bitcoin's trading at a year from now or 2 years from now, the cost to mine a Bitcoin is not going to be able to keep up with the value of Bitcoin. And while it is true that anybody can buy a miner if they're willing to pay the price and plug it in, not everyone's going to be able to do that at scale. You can look up in your own area what even institutions are paying for their electrical rates, commercial electrical rates. We're not talking about residential rates, which are horrendous. Even mine, which is among the cheapest that anybody can get, after paying for transmission and distribution costs, I'm still sitting somewhere around 12 or 14 cents a kilowatt hour. That's Canadian, so maybe approximately 10 cents a kilowatt hour US. Even commercial rates are at best maybe half that. The only way these miners that we are investing in are able to do it for even half that or more is because they situate their miners and acquire their electricity rates directly from the producer, not from the distributor, as all other commercial customers have to do. Unless you set up your plant or whatever it is you're doing directly beside a power producer like a hydroelectric dam or some other form of power plant, you're going to be paying substantially more for that power. So there's only so many sites in the world where that's even going to be possible. First come, first serve. That's how this works. And like I mentioned, the chip shortage is going to play a massive role in limiting who can enter this space, no matter how much money they have. But we're going to dive into those topics in further detail in the coming weeks. That's all for this one. Now let's get back to empire building.